I apologize if this gets lengthy, as there's a lot to unpack here. This happened to one of my best friends and I back in 2017, and I feel like it's worth sharing. For some backstory, my best friend Elise was dating this guy named Mark in 2016. They broke up right as New Year's was approaching. I've known Elise for over a decade, but we didn't talk much while they were together. I ran into them once at a local coffee shop, hugged her and was chatting away while Mark stared at me in disgust, as if Elise wasn't allowed to talk to her friends. At the time, I thought nothing of it, assuming he was just antisocial. I had no idea he would go on to ruin an entire year of my life. It's really fuzzy as to how Mark got in contact with me specifically. I believe Elise posted about her breakup, and I offered my support publicly on the post, so he targeted me. It all began on New Year's Eve. He started messaging me on Instagram, over and over, threatening me. I was having a get-together with my then-boyfriend, two of my now ex-best friends, and my now ex-best friend's boyfriend. I remember seeing the notifications blowing up and just ignoring it. Everyone else seemed to be more concerned than I was. I brushed it off until late the next day. I checked my phone, and I had dozens of DMs from Mark, as well as a few public posts that he had tagged Elise and I in, calling us every name in the book, and claiming that I was the reason they broke up. I answered his DMs, asking why he was targeting me. That was the biggest mistake I ever made. After some angry messages from him, he blocked me and I thought that was over. I also had some missed calls from Elise, so I finally contacted her and asked just what was going on. At this point, she frantically told me that Mark was a dangerous man, that he'd been tormenting her since the day they became a couple. He would throw her around in his apartment, leaving awful bruises that she sent me photos of. He would threaten to commit suicide if she left him, and he even threw a hissy fit at a tattoo shop because they wouldn't tattoo Elise's first and middle name over his eyebrow. He got Crybaby instead. Fitting. Elise also informed me that Mark had went to jail before meeting her for domestic abuse. He stabbed his ex-girlfriend in the leg and was only behind bars for about a month before his dad bailed him out. With this new information, I was of course terrified. Elise told me where he lived, and it was directly behind the coffee shop I mentioned earlier. I frequented that building and that part of town in general a lot. That'll come into play later. Eventually I calmed myself down and forgot all about him though, until somehow he got my phone number. I still don't know to this day how he got it, but I woke up in the morning to 30+ messages from him one day and was completely horrified. His messages included things like threats to kill himself if I didn't help him and Elise get back together, threats to kill me, cries for help, him blocking my number and then unblocking it just to start the cycle again. I, being very naive and not wanting to be held responsible if he actually killed himself, did not block him. I asked him to leave me alone, and if he wanted a number to a hotline where he could get some help. He pretended to calm down for a bit after that. I gave him the number after many messages from him saying how much he missed Elise but also wanted to kill her. I told her immediately, and pushed her to go to the police. She didn't. He conditioned her to believe that she would get in trouble if she reported him. This went on for months after. I usually didn't respond, and when I did, he seemed to mellow out for a bit. I'm skipping ahead to a particular night where Elise and I were hanging out at my house. We were just happily chatting away when my phone started to light up again. I ignored it and kept talking because I didn't want to be rude to Elise. Elise peeked at my phone and said, "It's Mark. Look." Sure enough, Mark was bombing my phone with threats to slit his own throat because he knew Elise was at my house, calling us both cunts and claiming it would be our fault if he died that night. I didn't answer, but what came next is something that still haunts me to this day. He sent a video. Being curious, I clicked it, Elise watching over my shoulder. The video was of Mark's arm, a huge gash going down the middle. He was fake crying in the background, screaming, "You made me do this! I fucking hate you both!" He clenched his fist over and over again to make more blood gush out of his arm. Elise and I were so in shock that we watched the entire 50-second clip, despite how disturbing it was. I immediately called our local police station. Elise gave them his address, and an officer came to my house to view the video and take down some notes. While we waited for the police to arrive, Mark posted the gruesome video to his Instagram and unblocked Elise and I just to tag us in it, claiming that we told him to do so. Being a conventionally attractive guy with an e-boy aesthetic, the girls that swooned over him commented some pretty harsh things about us and kissed his ass like crazy. He was admitted to the hospital that night, and oh boy, I wish they kept him. The harassment continued the very second he got out. Time traveling a little more now to a few months later, Mark still hadn't let up, but Elise and I were still very close. We had a friend, Kayla, visiting from across the country. She had also had a run-in online with Mark and absolutely hated him, but she wasn't afraid of him at all. She was always carrying more than one weapon, some pepper spray, and she knew how to fight, so she suggested we go take a walk in the part of town he lived in. She wanted to visit that coffee shop, see some of our small businesses, and then grab dinner at a pizzeria. Elise and I reluctantly agreed. We parked in front of the coffee shop, grabbed some drinks, and started walking down the road. Within about 5 minutes, Mark drove by on his motorcycle. Elise and Kayla were immersed in conversation as I trailed behind. I looked up and made eye contact with him. Elise and Kayla only noticed as he sped off, and Kayla assured us he wouldn't get anywhere near us with her around, so we just kept on walking. Mark began to circle the block we were walking on with his bike. As we crossed to the next block over, he switched to that one and circled it too. On the third block was the pizza place. Their walls are all glass, all see-through, of course. We went in and were seated in the corner right next to the glass. We sat there for about an hour and a half eating, talking, and sipping on soda. Mark circled the restaurant the entire time, and we all did our best to try and ignore him. Once we were finished and got up to leave, Mark sped off and we didn't see him again that evening. Some time passed and Mark began to ride by Elise's house every night. Within a week, he had begun doing the same thing to me. I told my parents and my stepfather, who kept a close eye on our street. My mom always made sure our doors and windows were locked, shades were shut, and the like before going to bed. My dad would even do a nightly patrol where he'd drive around my street for a few minutes on his way home from work, even though he no longer lived there. He would call me and let me know that the coast was clear as he was leaving. I still woke up almost every night to the sound of his motorcycle engine revving outside my house. We had no proof of this to show the police, because he was somehow doing all of this without a trace. We didn't bother to report it. At the end of 2017, Mark took his motorcycle and sped off to California to avoid all of the legal trouble he'd gotten into here. Elise and I were relieved to say the least. He still harassed us from time to time, but he never came back. We stopped hearing from him altogether after a while, and we both thought nothing of it. Fast forward one last time to September of 2019. Elise and I were out and about, enjoying the sunshine, when she got a phone call. Mark was dead. He had died right after his calls and messages to us had stopped. Turns out he'd gotten into it with his new drug dealer in Arizona and pissed them off enough for them to just shoot him. He died instantly. He also caught 2 more domestic violence charges in California and Arizona and was on the run from his warrant. His father told everyone it was an accidental overdose because Mark was known for abusing Xanax and other miscellaneous drugs, but it was to cover his sociopathic son's ass. I'm not sure if Mark's death was his karma, or some higher being protecting us and all of the girls he'd hurt before and would hurt in the future, but now he's gone. We never have to worry about our safety because of him ever again, although seeing photos of him still does give me the creeps. Mark, I don't know where you are, but this world is better off without people like you. I'm glad you're gone. I am Franck. I'm a nurse in a child hospital for 7 years now. Before that, I worked as a nurse assistant in different places, mostly psychiatric clinics or centers for the disabled. These places lack people to work in because of the peculiar patients they tend to take care of, and that's true. Even if you can experience joy or moving moments with these people, violence is also a great part of your daily routine. At the time, I had just switched from taking care of elders at home to night shifts. My girlfriend wasn't my wife yet at the time. We didn't live together, and we thought it would let us have a lot of spare time to see each other. Now, if you never did night shifts, it looks fair and square on plan, but I can tell you that staying awake for 10 hours and bearing responsibilities when your mind tells you every 5 minutes to take a nap is really hard. On the other hand, the paychecks are also very good. So basically, I moved from place to place every 2 months or so. That way, it was easier not to get bored and to avoid sleeping on the job. Sadly, that's what tends to happen once you're used to the ward, the patients, and the facilities. You end up being clumsy, and eventually you unconsciously allow yourself to pass out, first for 20 minutes, then 2 hours. Hopefully, I never reached that point. I started working in a psychiatric ward. It was beside the hills at the far east of the city. The neighborhood was extremely quiet and posh. You could tell it by the number of sports cars parked everywhere near big villas. The psychiatric hospital itself, though, was shabby, and parts of it were grossly rebuilt. It seemed misplaced with all of these fancy houses around, like a gaping scar on the face of a model. I thought we would be 2 persons at night. It's a common thing, but this ward they only had 1 staff every night. It was shaped like a cross with the infirmary desk at the center. The first 6 nights I spent there were okay. The patients were asleep when I arrived, so there wasn't much to do with the treatments, except taking out some trash. It was clearly some well-paid lazy time. The 3rd night, I remember the day shift talking about a patient who ran away, but I didn't pay much attention because this happens quite frequently. Actually, it depends on the way the patient is checked in. It needs 2 signatures, one from the shrink who diagnosed the mental illness, and one from the doctor who decides to put him in the mental hospital. Way too often the first one forgets to sign the file bill, and the hospital has to send a notice to the local medical court. Some cases take up to 7 months to be read in court, so if the patient bails out by himself during that time, the hospital isn't in charge of taking him back. The staff is never anxious about that because 85% of them come back within the week. The other 15%, though, are still a mystery for me. That night, I just checked all the over-door alarms with my keys before heading to the infirmary to have a cup of coffee. From the moment I took that shift, though, something wasn't feeling as usual. The patients I visited to give the treatments were strangely silent, no laughing or joking. From 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., I checked 6 times behind furnitures and sofas. It was like someone was following me from a short distance and stopped in the dark whenever I looked back. I was coming back from the trash containers when I came across the living room. The couch had some strange blackish stains on it, and I was certain that those weren't there when I had arrived at 9 p.m. Furthermore, I found a green shirt on the floor with those exact same stains on it. I decided to come back to the infirmary and lock myself in until 6 a.m. When I came back to the infirmary desk, though, I found that a chair was blocking the door from the inside. When I looked by the big glass window at first, nothing. But then, I saw one bare foot and a slight glance of pants because of the angle, but I could be sure that there was a person hiding underneath the desk. I didn't know who it was and what intentions they had. I decided to call the security guard patrolling outside. On the phone, he told me he had witnessed a man running in the park towards the building, but that he was sure he was hiding in a ditch around the garden. I told him the man was actually inside with me, so he replied that he'd be there soon. That was the longest 25 minutes of my life. I called up the head nurse and she arrived 5 minutes after the security guard. At some point, the person had moved the chair, and they finally caught him. It was the patient that had escaped 3 days ago. He was shirtless and covered in the same blackish stains from head to toe. They found out it was shit. He had shat himself multiple times. What they didn't tell me, and what I learned from a colleague 2 weeks after, is that they found a piece of wood with a sharp shard of glass embedded in it in one of his pockets. This just happened. I tried to make it shorter, but wanted to be thorough on recounting it, and have it down somewhere for later without anything missing. So I have a friend who does well for himself, as does his wife, and they frequently go on trips or weekend getaways. This is one of those weekends. They had me come over and watch their 2 dogs, which I love doing. When I met my friend here on Friday, I parked in the street so he could get out. He told me, "Make sure you park in the driveway, so it looks like someone is always here." I figured, yeah, sure. Now normally when I get here, they've already left, and I just pull into the driveway, but whatever. I didn't move my car after he left. Both dogs are incredibly aggressive when someone comes to the door, but other than that, usually they're pretty chill. They can see people right outside the house and don't mind, but the second someone touches the door, they freak out. I always got this feeling at my buddy's house. It's a really strong, you're being watched type of feeling, but I've always chalked that up to my being paranoid when I'm alone. Nothing supernatural or anything like that. At this point, it was about 3:45 a.m., and I'm with the older dog, Maya. She was being quite weird in the bed, and keeps getting up and going over to the door. I figured she was thirsty, and I shouldn't have closed her in there with me. But it's just habit, and I don't like sleeping with the doors open. So off Maya goes downstairs, and I close the door. About 5 to 7 minutes go by, and that's when I heard a blood-curdling bark. The kind I've never heard Maya make, even when I show up unannounced and go to the door without my friend greeting me. I thought, I should probably get out of bed and go check this out. As I walked over to the blinds and slided them open to peek, someone had parked in the driveway, left their door open and the car running, but the headlights were turned off. I would have recognized someone pulling in from the vantage of the window. That someone was standing at the front door, screen door open, hand on the door, and now looking around panicked as Maya began barking more intensely. I flipped the light on in the bedroom and hallway, visible from the door to alert him that someone was there and wasn't happy. After that, I go back to the window as I dial 911 and grab my belt out of the loops on the floor for a makeshift weapon. Yeah, I know it's pretty dumb, but I was really scared. The person who was trying to break in was now walking back over to their car with something long and thin in his hand, maybe a screwdriver or a knife. It was dark, but there are lawn lights so you can see some things, just a bit difficult to make out. Then he leans around the side of the house, but in a way like he's trying to talk to someone. As I'm on the phone with the operator, I let her know that there's a man going back to his car with some kind of object and walking around the house. I was trying to read his license plate, but I couldn't make it out from this vantage point, as he'd pulled a little too close and it was too dark out. She told me the officers would be there in a minute, and stays on the phone with me to describe what I see. At this point, both dogs are going nuts, but that's when I go to the hallway again and look into the opposite bedroom. The motion light in the backyard was on. I think to myself, did this guy try to go to the back first? I relay this to the operator, who tells me to try and keep the car in my vision from a safe space of the bedroom. As I go back to look, I see another man come from the side of the house. I now realize the light went off because someone was in the back and front at the same time. Scared, unsure of what to do, certain the police were going to take their time, I started to snap a little. I was considering yelling out the window to make it known the cops are coming and I was prepared. I'm not at all, of course. The belt wouldn't do anything, and these guys could have easily fucked me up. Both men hopped into their car and backed out of the driveway without ever turning the headlights on. I could make out the first 3 letters of the plate. That's it before the lawn lights weren't strong enough and they started to turn. I got the make and model to the operator though. They stopped a few houses down and started to do the same thing again, it seems, only to have the house have motion lights in the front there. That seemed to deter them, and after that they pulled out of the neighborhood quite fast. The police were at this house less than 2 minutes later. I gave them the description. They looked around outside the house, said there was nothing they could do, and that typically there was an officer in this neighborhood closer by, as they use one of these back streets as a speed trap. They have the description, as does the operator, so they'll relay the information and keep their eyes peeled.